Have you ever looked in the mirror and just seen your mother's eyes looking right back at you? Or maybe you have your dad's exact same smile? We all know we get our traits from our parents. But how are they actually chosen? What are the rules? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into today and uncover the fascinating science of heredity. Okay, let's start with something really simple. Go on, take a look at your earlobes. Seriously, are they dangling free like the image on the left? Or is the bottom part connected straight to the side of your head, like the attached earlobe on the right? This tiny little difference is an inherited trait, one of thousands that makes each of us unique.
So yeah, this leads us to that classic question. We're obviously a mix of our parents, but it's not like mixing two colors of paint, right? So how does our body decide which traits to show off? Well, the answer, believe it or not, came from a very quiet and unexpected place, a monastery garden. This is where the first real rules of genetics were discovered.
To really get these rules, we've got to go back in time. Our story doesn't start in some high-tech lab, but with a brilliant monk and his very, very humble pea plants. This is literally where the code of heredity was first cracked.
This is Gregor Mendel. Now, he had a background in both science and math, which was his secret weapon. For centuries, people had seen that traits were passed down, but Mendel was the first person to actually stop and count them. And that one simple act of counting, well, it changed everything.
So here's what he did. In one of his big experiments, he took a pea plant that was pure for being tall, meaning it always had tall offspring, and crossed it with a plant that was pure for being short. You might expect something in the middle, right? Some medium-sized plants? But nope. What he got was a huge surprise. Every single one of the new plants was tall. Okay, so wait a minute. This was a real puzzle. If all the new baby plants were tall, what on earth happened to the shortness trait? Did it just poof, vanish into thin air? Was it gone forever? This is the question Mendel had to figure out next. So he let those new tall plants reproduce. And in the next generation, guess what? The shortness trait came back. And it wasn't random at all. He noticed a beautiful, predictable pattern. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 short plant. A perfect 3-to-1 ratio. The shortness trait was never gone. It was just hiding. This amazing discovery gave us the words to describe what was happening. Mendel called the trait that shows up, like tallness, the dominant trait. And the one that gets hidden, like shortness, he called the recessive trait. A recessive trait only shows up if you get 2 copies of its instruction. For example, a widow's peak hairline is dominant, while a straight hairline is recessive.
But Mendel didn't stop there. He started wondering, do traits stick together? You know, like does a tall plant always have to have green peas? So he started crossing plants with 2 different traits. And what he found was that the traits are inherited independently. It's like shuffling 2 separate decks of cards. You can get all sorts of new combinations that weren't even there in the parents.
Now, the most incredible part is that Mendel figured all of this out without ever seeing a gene or a strand of DNA. He had no idea what was physically being passed on. So now let's fast forward and connect his amazing work to what we now know is happening deep inside our cells. Those mysterious factors Mendel talked about? Well, today we call them genes. You can think of your DNA as this huge, incredibly detailed instruction manual for building and running, well, you. And each gene is just a single instruction in that manual for a specific feature.
So how does an instruction on a piece of DNA become, say, a tall plant? It's a really neat process. The gene gives the cell the blueprint to make a specific protein. That protein then goes off and does a job. Maybe it helps make a growth hormone. If the gene's instruction is for a super efficient protein, you get a lot of hormone and a tall plant. Simple as that.
Now, these genes aren't just floating around loose inside our cells. They are all neatly packed into these structures called chromosomes. And here's the key part. Just like Mendel predicted without ever seeing them, we get 2 sets of chromosomes, one from our mother and one from our father. And that means we have 2 copies, or 2 versions of almost every single gene. Okay, now that we've got the basic rules down, let's use them to look at a perfect example of this whole system at work. How our biological sex is determined. In us humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now, 22 of those pairs are perfectly matched, but that 23rd pair, that one's special. These are the sex chromosomes. A female has a matched pair of 2 large X chromosomes. A male, on the other hand, has a mismatched pair, 1 X and 1 much smaller Y chromosome.
So here's how it all plays out. A mother only has X chromosomes, right? So every child, boy or girl, is guaranteed to get an X from their mom. The father, though, makes 2 different kinds of sperm. About half carry an X and the other half carry a Y. So at the end of the day, the sex of the child is decided by which one of the dad's sperm wins the race to the egg. And because the father produces these two types of sperm in roughly equal numbers, there's about a 50% chance the child will be a girl, getting an X from dad, and a 50% chance the child will be a boy, getting a Y. It's basically a genetic coin toss every single time.
So, we've seen the rules for how traits get passed down. But let's zoom out for a second. Why is all this mixing and matching and variation so important? It goes way, way beyond just family resemblances. It's actually fundamental to life on Earth. You see, all this genetic variation is the raw material for evolution. Just think about it. If every single person was a perfect clone, a single new disease or sudden change in the environment could wipe us all out in one go. But because we're all a little different, some of us will have traits that give us an edge, helping us survive, reproduce, and pass on those helpful genes.
All right, so let's do a quick recap. We've learned that traits can be dominant or recessive. We each have 2 copies of every gene. Different traits usually get shuffled around independently, creating all sorts of new combinations. This variation is absolutely crucial for species to adapt and survive. And in humans, it's the father's contribution, either an X or a Y chromosome, that determines the sex of the child.
So, there's no doubt that our genes provide the blueprint for who we are. But that leaves us with a really deep and fascinating question, doesn't it? If our genes are the plan, how much of the final building is shaped by our environment, our choices, and our experiences? That's a question science is still exploring, and it's something to think about.